Tropical Storm Don continues to look a bit better organized this evening. I'm Mike Naso from IPR365.com with the latest tropical video update, and we are following Tropical Storm Don. And as we look at it on the visible satellite this evening as the sun starts to go down, clearly is a lot better organized than it was this time yesterday, and a lot better organized than it was even, say, 6 hours ago. The reconnaissance is on its way out. It is making passes through to see exactly what's going on within the center of Don, which appears to be on the northern edge of this convection. However, if the center is a little bit more trying to relocate more underneath this blob here, which continues to burst, we would likely see the chance that this is getting a little bit stronger. And we have had some step frequency microwave radiometer winds that the aircraft was finding getting pretty strong, 60-70 miles an hour. However, not all of those may be legit. Nevertheless, that is an indication that certainly Don is trying to strengthen. And looking at that loop I'm showing here, clearly you can see it appears to be in a little bit less hostile an environment than it had yesterday, but clearly there is still shear coming in from the north, and the push, the flow from the high pressure to the north of it, creating some easterly wind shear problems. That is what we're dealing with Don at this point, but by no means does that mean Don can't strengthen, and we'll talk about that throughout this video update. I did want to give you the latest, though, on Tropical Storm Don. As of 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern, it was at 24.9 north, 91.3 west. Now that's important because if the reconnaissance fixes the center more under the convection, then it may be a little bit more in this area here that I'm drawing rather than where the center was located at 4 p.m. If it relocates underneath the convection, that changes the whole ball game in terms of the track, which could be further to the south, as well as the intensity, which could be more on the high end if Don undergoes intensification throughout the night, which we will all be watching like a hawk, no doubt. Nevertheless, the forecast does have it, like I said yesterday, sometime midnight to 2 a.m. Saturday morning coming ashore. It's moving a lot faster than it was last night. It's moving northwest at 16, and that's important too. If the center relocates here and is moving northwest and then gradually bends back west, the track might not actually shift all that much from the landfall point, but rather be right on track with where it was forecast, even if the center relocates. But that's not set in stone by any means whatsoever. I did want to note we do have tropical storm watches out from the Rio Grande northward, and we do have the tropical storm warnings from areas here of Port Mansfield on up to San Luis Pass, just south of there, with the expectation of tropical storm force conditions coming on shore. I should note that we don't have any hurricane watches yet, but that could become a possibility if Don continues to look a little bit better organized, because hurricane warnings mean hurricane force conditions, say, within 24 hours, and we would be getting to the point, say, within the next 6 to 8 hours of being within the 24-hour landfall chance, and if it were to become a hurricane, then you'd obviously want to have those warnings issued. But again, right now the odds are it doesn't become a hurricane unless it gets better organized, but it is heading in the right direction to get better organized. You can see the wind radii is a little bit larger than it was last night, but not much, and you can see that track was through time like this, so if it does make landfall near, say, Corpus Christi, we could have a swath of winds further to the north that could complicate matters for the coastline. You can see the model guidance here continues to take it with the rebuilding high pressure that flow like that right on into southern Texas over the next 24 to 36 hours. Now here's a close-up of the visible, and this is the most recent loop, and you can see at the end there, look at this bubbling going on here over the center of Don. That does make me a little bit apprehensive, and the reason why is because when you have small storms like this strengthening over the Gulf of Mexico, you always have to be careful. We're not quite to August, but we're pretty much there, more or less. But you can see these clouds here turning like this. That is the outer edge of the center, so it still is not directly over the center. But if there is some kind of tilt, if there is some kind of relocation, anything that might warrant the center bubbling more directly underneath this, then that changes the whole ball game, because then you're talking about a system with organizing, deepening convection over the top of it, which would warrant intensification. Also note these clouds here kind of expanding out from the center is trying to organize itself a bit more but you can still see there is some wind shear falling off from the north over the top of it, but a lot less than yesterday. If you watch those clouds, you can see it's more of a bursting out rather than a crushing inward towards the system, which is an indication that the shear is letting up. And we're going to be watching this very carefully. I should also note here that the radar out of Corpus, which is where we're going to be watching to see this thing make landfall, does show some of the very, very first showers from dawn coming onto view, and this will get progressively worse. However, it's not all that bad news. Texas is in the middle of a drought, and it could use some rain. Of course, that could come at the expense of a strengthening tropical cyclone coming on shore, which is why we're always so cautious as to what these systems will do. Now, for those watching this update, some of you might remember, some of you might not. I remember tracking this vividly. It seems like yesterday, but it was actually 8 years ago. It was Hurricane Erica, and it developed about 2 weeks from this point in time. And it was a tropical disturbance, moved over Florida, looked very well organized. It almost looked like Hurricane Andrew did on radar, of course, without all the intensity. And as it moved into the Gulf, it quickly became a tropical storm. And it was in a much better environment than Don can ever imagine being in. It had high pressure aloft, very hot waters, everything was prime for some serious strengthening. But it was moving so fast. It had this high pressure to the north, much like Don, and the easterly shear, it was just too much for it to overcome. Nevertheless, it became a minimal hurricane just as it was making landfall, and it missed Texas because the pressure was so strong from the north that it got pushed further south. This is not quite a good analog for Don, but it does make worth noting that easterly shear could always be a problem with these systems if the high to the north is so strong that the system doesn't even have a chance to stack itself because it gets shunted on off towards the west so fast. Of course, Don's further south 2 weeks earlier, and it's more or less in a different type of environment than Erica was. It does work towards its advantage that a system like Erica could have gone under such easterly shear and still become a hurricane. But again, looking at the wind shear profile on Don, it does have some northeasterly shear here, although it is decreasing. And as it moves overnight into this area here, this is its best opportunity for some strengthening, and then it will be how strong can it get prior to making landfall along the South Texas coastline, and we're going to be watching that very, very carefully. I did want to make note of this tropical wave in the central Atlantic looking a bit better organized this evening. Not ideal conditions to see a lot of these stable clouds out here. However, the Canadian model has been very, very persistent in making this system, before it really was even on our radar, or satellite for that matter, into a hurricane. It made it into a hurricane and takes it up towards Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, then the Bahamas, but that is a long way out, and right now the odds are probably against that. However, the model guidance does tend to bring this system on off towards the west or west-northwest, and we're going to keep a close eye on it. You can see the GFS model here after it takes Don into Texas. You can see it does bring our system through the islands, and then with not much of a system, whatever is left of it here, south of Haiti, moving on off towards the west-northwest. It is that time of year. We're getting towards August, and all indications are that we could see some serious activity. So as Don goes into Texas, we'll continue to see if that wave does become something in the next couple of days to watch for the islands. If I were in the islands, I'd keep an eye on it, but it's nothing extreme at this point in time. However, we're going to keep an eye on Tropical Storm Don. Could it become Hurricane Don? There is always that chance. Right now, odds are against it, but it does look a lot better organized and a lot less hostile an environment than it did this point yesterday. So we're watching Don here at IPR, and you'll want to keep a close eye on it as well. I'm Mike Nasel from IPR365.com with the latest on Tropical Storm Don. I will see you next time.